University and immediately goes into law school, where he became highly respected. We read that in the obituary, blah, blah, blah. One thing that wasn't included in the obituary was Greg's first job. We all heard him tell that story 1,000 times.
Tell it!
Tell it! Tell it!
I can't tell it.
Later.
He was so proud of it, and I'd always say, Greg, why are you so proud of that story?
We didn't hear it for a long time.
Well, and so I started passing that story around tonight a little bit at the ward with a couple of people, and they were just horrified. So that was Greg's first day. You think back, and he worked hard, and he provided very well. And he had a big heart. Cindy said it best here recently with the line that we don't know what took his life. A man works all his life, and then he fucking dies. And there's a certain unfairness to that. And it kills me, it kills all of us to think that hard-working son of a bitch passed away with no loved ones around him. It's not the way a man should die. But in death, he will live for a long time. Cindy made the point that he didn't die from eating too many cream cheese, alligator pastries. He didn't die from chocolate malts. He didn't die from a bad diet. He didn't die from not doing any exercise. He died from having a huge heart that simply grew just once. It's kind of like the Grinch. His heart grew so big, doing so much for so many people, that eventually it just stopped. Mike and I would talk to him. He's pulling a wagon. He's got people, a plow horse.
In the field.
And he's got people that he is helping. People you never even know he was helping.
I know, I don't.
Either with free legal service or dollars on the side. And of course, he was building his house that he was going to retire in. How sad is it that he comes within 2 years of retiring, enjoys about his fifth steam shower anywhere in this beautiful bathroom, and boom, down, gone. There he goes. It's a good lesson for all of us. The old line, it doesn't matter what we have in this world. No matter how big of our house, no matter how fancy our car, the size of our holes are all the same. I looked it up. A grave is 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, and 8 feet deep. And every one of us, no matter our station in life, that is all we get. That, plus the lasting memory and legacy of Greg, our brother, our father, our grandfather, our friend, family member, and the like. So it's the memories, you know. He was big on genealogy, right? Big on genealogy, part of his faith. And I'll give him 10 kudos times 20 for the faith he had and the faith he built. I may not have agreed with it. What do I know? What do any of us know when it comes to faith? That's why we call it fucking faith, right? That's why we call it faith. But anyway, at the end, all we're left with is memories of Greg. I could tell stories all night long about the things we did together, the times we had. I didn't know him well growing up. You know, how old was I when he left school? You know, I was barely learning how to discover myself. But when he left for school from Marquette, this tells you our relationship. When he left for Marquette, I watched down the hall. He was a great model builder. God, he could build models. And I watched, and as soon as the taillights went over the hill, I went into his bedroom, and I grabbed most of his models, and I took them outside, and I doused them with gasoline. And I threw a match on them. And I thought, there you go, you know. Had no concept, you know what I didn't know.
Oh my God.
How old were you, Tim? How old were you? How old were you?
8th grade.
Oh wow. Yeah. It was fun to blow up stuff then and start it on fire. I can relate.
He would build with me all the time, and we built the warships. We loved the old war models. We'd go down to Benner's and we'd pick one out, fucking paint everything, and I'd hang them from that room in the
It's
ceiling.
unbelievable.
So not only did Tim burn Greg's models, we had the warship. It was called the Yamamoto or Yamamoto, whatever it was. A beautiful model of a warship. And Greg's gone, and shit flows downhill with brothers. So when Greg was gone, Tim would beat the living shit out of me. Home, and it was like France being liberated. There was only a matter of time before the troops withdrew, and I was back under fucking Nazi occupation. So he takes the Yamamoto out to the garage, and he's like, "Hey, this isn't battle tested." And I don't know what's going on. So the fucker with gasoline puts it in the middle of the garage, pours like a little puddle of gasoline around it, and stands back with the little thing of matches, and he's like, "Oh, it's under attack." Finally, a match hits the gas, boom, ships up in flames. It burned enough. I went out, I doused it. I don't know if you remember this. I saved the Yamamoto. Next time Greg came home, we rebuilt that with the plaster of Paris rolled on the front of the ship.
Right.
We repaired that ship.
After he beat the shit out of me. Anyway, we'll pass this around more. Greg did have a huge heart, and despite that kind of a love-hate deal that an 8th grader going through puberty, a senior in high school who thinks he's the cock of the walk, he could have. I'll never forget. One night I thought he was such a bitter and sinful man, and I was going to be a priest. And, so one night he comes in and he catches me. I was big on holy water. Holy water is a very magical thing in this world, and don't kid yourself. Holy water can do many, many, many things. He comes in to the bedroom. I'm getting ready for bed, and I'm dousing his bed with holy water, hoping that it will do something for him. There came another beating. They were all out of love, and when Greg left for college, I decided I had enough history in my own life that I was going to start writing sad songs for lonely people, and I had a song.
For horses, pets, and people?
What's that?
For horses, pets, and people?
No, sad songs for lonely bad. That's actually what the name of that artist. The artist. But anyway, in the back of the comic books, there was Lou Tobin publishing that song, and I thought, great. I had a delusion that I was going to write this song at eighth grade, and it was going to make me a lot of money. And I had to get it converted to sheet music. I didn't know sheet music or whatever. And this Lou Tobin wanted maybe $12. $12 in 1969 was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
And it is still a lot of money. Don't kid yourself. talking to the people who like to go out and spend $15-20 on a fucking Starbucks every day. And griping about how they don't have any money. I wrote Greg and I asked him, would you help me with this? And that son of a gun sent me the money so I could register that song. And it hasn't seen the light of day. That's the kind of guy he was. He would do anything for anyone. Tonight, I'll close now. Chris, Jill, and I had the privilege of standing around the ward, and 3 old-time lawyers came up, and they were talking to you guys for quite a while before I stepped in and told them who I was, and they all kind of stepped back, gave me a mild genuflect, and that was cool. But they talked about in Wisconsin, there's a listserv, basically a website where lawyers, will consult with each other. And Greg was active on that site. But a couple of weeks ago, I had a lawyer in the Twin Cities call me up, and he said, any chance Greg Cook, your brother? I said, yeah. He said, there is a listserv website that is just lighting up with accolades about Greg Cook. And the things he did for young lawyers and the help he gave them. And that's what these 3 guys tonight were talking about. And one guy, he just said he was selfless in anything and everything he did. And he learned that maybe from the best. He learned it from on top. We've got a lot of kind, selfless people in this room, and we can best keep him solidly in our lives and in our hearts by living the way he did, being selfless and giving and kind, except maybe you don't buy 4 or 5 fucking $300 remodel projects. To be remodeled. Who's next, Debbie? You want to say something?
Oh,
Yeah.
not yet.
Not yet.
Well, let's jack it up.
Tyler.
Or Tim. Or
I'll
no,
say a
just
quick
cheers.
one
Yeah,
about
Tim.
that.
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, Tim.
No pressure. Pick up when you want. Yeah.
One quick lesson on this for folks. A lot of people are not sure how to use a microphone, so you may do this. What you've got to do is get that microphone right up to your lips like you're about ready to kiss it or swallow it. So you get it right up there,
Yeah.
and that's the way you're best heard.
Spit on that thing.
Yeah, just not too close. So I don't get dental work. I got dental work.
I just,
Thanks so
when
much.
Jim was talking about how Greg just loved to serve people, I remember, so we would all, like the siblings would be like, oh dang it, why doesn't Greg retire? He just works, she spends, and it would be really frustrating. It would just be like, we just wanted him to take some time. What? Well, she should be. But, and she told me she wasn't invited to this party, so I invited her tonight. Anyway, so when I came for Chris and Jill's wedding, Greg was giving me a ride to the airport when I was going out, and I said, Greg went, this was like 2017. So he was, how old would he have been, like 60?
66.
Okay, so he reached retirement age, and I said, when are you going to retire? This is when they had just remodeled this one house that was just gorgeous, beautiful home. I said, when are you going to retire? And he goes, oh, I don't know. You know, I love doing what I do. I love doing what I do. And I go, Greg, wouldn't you just like to just retire and just enjoy life and take it easy and not just work so hard? Because he'd go to the office so early. When he came to pick me up at the airport that night, it was like 10:30 at night. He hadn't been home yet. Came to the airport, got me, took me home. He hadn't had dinner or anything. I mean, it was just like he just worked so much. And I said, don't you just want to just enjoy life a little bit? And he's like, I love serving people. He said, I just love what I do, and I just love what I can help people doing. And he did. This lady came up to me tonight, and she said, your brother, her husband had died suddenly. He had been in education, and she said she didn't know if he said, are you getting his pension? And she said, for some reason, some paper hadn't been signed, Greg went to work, took care of it, got this paper signed, went through the hoops. I mean, he just loved helping people. I mean, he did. And he could never say no to anybody. He was just generous to a fault. And Cindy was right when she said his heart just pumped one last time. And it just, he just gave his best.
All right, who's next? This will be Kathy Cook. She is Greg's third sister. Kathy.
Yeah. Okay. Now you made me lose my track. There's so much to say. I do think that Greg just gave and gave. Like, if you ever needed anything, you always had this idea. We all called him Giggy, and like Giggy was gonna be there for you, no matter what. You could just reach out, and he was there. And I remember when, Giggs went through phases of his life, right? So when he was with Denise, and maybe people don't know this with Giggs, but I mean, there was a period of time that he smoked a fair amount of weed. Okay? And I remember that.
Fair amount.
So when he went through his divorce, Greg would come down to visit me in Rochester, and we got kind of close through this, and he shared a lot of things with me, and I always felt like with Greg, he just never felt like he was enough. He always felt like he wasn't enough for people, enough for anything, or good enough. And that's just something that always breaks your heart. And I think that's why, he always just really did want to give back. And so he had come down to Rochester, and I was going to set him up with one of the nurse anesthetists that I knew that was single. She was attractive, she was young, his age, but he was younger. And I remember when she met him, she was like, "Oh, you're dangerous, like you've just been divorced." But I remember Greg and I were sitting on our front patio, and he smoked a fair amount of weed, okay? And when I say a fair amount, I don't think I've ever seen someone, and listen, I wanted to say I love my brother Greg, okay? This is just what life, but I've never seen someone take so many hits as Greg did. Okay? And so I think we're on the front porch, and it could have been his, 20th toke, okay? And I remember I turned to him and I'm like, can people, get addicted to weed? And he's just like, I don't know, but they really never met me, okay? So, just classic, okay? And you couldn't see Greg where he didn't either tell you, you'd meet him and he always made light of everything. He always had something funny to say, and he'd often be something funny about himself, right? He'd often, make a joke about himself, which I think a lot in our family tend to do, but he just was such a great person from anything that came about. He just made light of it. He didn't ever get offended. He didn't ever be like, no. He just would make light of things. And not that Giggy didn't have a temper to a certain extent, which he did. And that temper would come out, and it was he really had a passionate temper. He had a temper that would come out, and it would usually come out in maybe a defense of something, or maybe even, like I said, this underlying thing that I always felt with Greg, that there was something inside him that he always felt like maybe I'm not enough for people. And that, I think, for all of us, it's just such a loss, because you wanted him to know that he was enough. And I'll tell one story that, in the end, I told this earlier, and people were like, well, is that love? But it's an old story Greg used to tell. So we have a family of 7. So we're very split, because there's, I think, 19 years between the oldest and the youngest. 17. And so the younger of us, there's 3 of us younger, 3 older, and Cindy's in the middle. And so we kind of had 2 families in a way of how we did. So Colette was little. Greg would come home from, Colette will tell their story from college, steal her clothes, and she'd cry and he'd be the big boogeyman or whatever. But Greg, so he would tell stories about when they were younger. And of course my parents, they're young, my mom is working, my dad is working, and you know, they're struggling financially, and my mom would always usually get like, you know, like one bag of candy or maybe a Snickers bar a week that like you would share. And I just always remember Greg would always tell this story about how like he's like 5 or 6, right?
He's older than that.
7, I don't know, 7 or 8, how much older, he's a little kid. And my dad comes home for probably being out, and my dad, I mean, most people here know him, amazing man. And had gone out, maybe had a couple belts, as they called them back then. And my mom is at nursing alumni, not home that night, which was rare. And comes home, and Greg's in the kitchen, and Dad comes home, and he's like, says to Greg, "Where's the Snickers bar?" Right? Or where is it? And Greg's like, "I know, but I'm not gonna tell you." So that's when our dad comes, pulls his arm behind his back, and he's like, "Where's the Snickers bar?" And Greg is like, "It's in the dog cupboard." It's in the dog cupboard. You know, Dad drops him to the ground, grabs the Snickers bar. And of course I could tell that, and everybody's like, "What?" And I'm like, "That's what love is." Okay? That is just what love is. So, anyway, we'll miss it.
Thanks, Gail. Quick correction on that. The reason Greg had to have 21 hits was because he'd always call me. He says, "Can you get me a little weed?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, Greg. I'm not sure if you need any weed." And, he'd always say, "Well, what do you need? How much can I pay you? How much can I pay you?" And I'd say, "Greg, you're not going to pay me anything that would make me a drug dealer." So for his own protection, we box it up. I'd mail it to him. You know, this was back in the days when we all thought we might go to jail if the U.S. Postal Service was mailing weed through the mail. What he didn't know, and he always cherished not knowing, "Oh man, this weed's good, this weed's good." It was oregano. It was oregano. That's why he kept smoking it over and over. Who's next?
Remember that time I got that weed from, one time when I worked my first job in this little Indian reservation in Montana, and I bought this weed from there, and I didn't smoke very much. I wasn't eating.
Oh, yeah.
So I took it back home with me, and I don't know why Greg was in Tracy, Minnesota, but we all went. We were in Tracy, Minnesota, at my grandma's house, and Greg and Tim and I went out. We smoked that weed. Greg talked about that for years. He was just like, "Oh my God, that weed you brought from the It
wasn't oregano.
He would just like go crazy about it for years and years and years. You remember that?
Was it oregano?
No, it was real. He was just so enamored with it. He was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best if I ever smoked that." It really was. It was me, really, but.
All right. Here's something from Mike.
So while we're talking weed stories, some of the best times that I had were driving back with Tim and Greg, and I would. Geez, I gotta get together. It's been a long day. So we would drive to North Dakota all the time. I would fly to Minneapolis, and Greg would drive, and then we'd go. And the times in the car. So there's before the conversion to Mormonism. So before the conversion to Mormonism, when you say you've never seen anyone smoke as much weed, this guy could put. So I'm in the back seat. Those two are in the front, and I'm just fearing for my life. I mean, I never took a hit of weed, but I was probably more stoned than I ever been, just from the secondhand smoke. But it was just constantly one hitter. Next subject, whatever, Kim's popping Miller Lights in the front seat. And just have my rosary out at just after Greg converted to Mormonism, he LDS, sorry. Stop cold turkey, no weed. So now we're driving back. Of course, numbnuts doesn't quit. He's still, got his little film canister and his one hitter that probably carries more disease. Anyway, so Greg would get to the point where he's just watching Tim load up one after one after one at a time. And finally, he just asks for the canister. He just wants to smell it. So Tim's smoking the weed, Greg just over there like a huckleberry pie, just getting the whiff of that, and but never did until we're back visiting. This was when Dad was over in the home, and we would stay at Bethesda, and Tim and I were there, and Greg went back to the house to be alone. We take breaks or whatever, and so then we go back. And Greg is rifling through Tim to find the weed. To take a hit of weed. That just to be like, Greg, you don't have, we're not going to tell on you. You're secret safe with us. If you want to take a hit of weed, it's okay. But that shows, the discipline that he had. But then he had those same... We were at the golf tournament one year, and of course, at the golf tournament, all my friends that come out, they're smoking weed, because it's legal in Colorado. And when Greg's leaving, he's cleaning up around, and I see him wiping the counter, and there's a little roach clip that's on the counter, just last part of the joint, and he kind of goes over that and then puts it in his pocket. Greg, did you mean to sweep up that roach and put it in your pocket? And he's like, well, I just like to smell it. So we took it back to the hotel later on that night. I'm sure it was just, that's so good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Let's get a few other recollections. I suppose we can start with
I got one for you, Tim.
Go ahead, Becky.
All right, Tim, the time he took a picture of you at Mike's house, double fisting, cleaning up the edges of the cake.
Right.
Oh,
And he happened to encapsulate your soul as you were doing that and then use it against you on Facebook.
Right.
Well, you know why.
Right.
know why.
Greg and I had a
Retaliation.
long-standing
Retaliation,
battle of
exactly.
trying to catch each other in compromising positions. And sadly for us, most of the compromising positions were only a crack pipe at our lips or some birthday cake that we were mowing down. Beyond that, we were pretty clean livers. And back to kind of maybe close out a shade of the weed stories, we could go on forever with them. He'd always say on the drives back, let me have a hit, as he's moving into his new life with Tony and her family and his faith. And I'd say, no, you're not going to have a hit. That's against your faith. You keep preaching at me. So you either knock off the preaching or you're going to live by that by which you preach. And give me a hit. I said, let's do this. Every time I'd shut him up, I'd say, let's get Tony on the phone, and we'll call Tony. Tony says you can have a hit, you can have a hit. And that was the end of
Be a
that.
love dog.
Right, yeah, the love,
Dog boy love.
Dog boy love king. I heard some folks talk about that philosophy. I was thinking, you know, I was going to hope to see if we couldn't find that 10,000 or 9,995 books that he had printed that are still here somewhere. We just started giving them away. The dog boy
Yeah, the
love
hats.
king.
Yeah, the hats.
And the hats.
That
and
might have
the hats.
surpassed your song, actually.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, and the more you think about it, it is a good religion in and of itself. It's basically treat your spouse or significant other, you know, just with every ounce of kindness and goodness and generosity that you can, and it'll come back to you tenfold, 20-fold, 30-fold.
That's not.
I don't think that's
not
the
what I got from
philosophy.
that.
That's not the philosophy.
Basically, you do all the shit around the house, and once in a while, your wife will let you have sex with her.
I don't think that philosophy has anything to do with sex.
That's the way he would explain it.
This is the speech tomorrow.
Okay.
Return to your husband, and somebody should say, a happy wife is a happy life. And then he's going to turn to you, and he's going to say, Katie, don't press your luck.
I think of three phases, right? I mean, the pre-phase, which I don't know much about, which is the stuff that the siblings talk about, the younger years, right? Early phase of Greg, I think of VHS tapes at John and Eggs. When Christmas is, these guys would do like fun game shows. They would host Wheel of Fortune or cool little trivia things where Greg was almost like a Chevy Chase like figure. He looked like him, he talked like him, and he was funny. And we were young, and there was an East Side clan of the cousins, which was like Greg's cousins and Tim's kids. Spent a lot of time together. And we very honestly spent a lot of time with the Westfalls out east. So we didn't get all that much action, but we did have one summer out there at the pool house. I don't know who all remembers, but we played NBA Jam, and we hung out.
Everybody
in Chris's
remember.
room.
Everybody remember.
It was one of the best trips ever, where all the Westfalls jumped in the truck and we headed out east. So it was like the pre-phase. Greg was just this cool, funny guy that you just heard cool stories about. And, you know, middle phase Greg, for me personally, I was fortunate enough to go on the river trip where Grandpa John was initially going to go on the trip, and he offered up his seat to me. I can't remember the year. I think it was post Iraq. I think I had just gotten back from Iraq.
6.
No, it was 8. No, it was 8.
Because I just moved back from Australia.
I came back from Iraq. I was living at 1618 with Kate, and I drove out there, I think in Mom's car, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyways, Greg and Becky and Chris were on that trip. Brian guided, of course.
Scott.
Zach.
Scott.
No, Zach was an employee of Brian.
Yep.
Just an absolute legend on the river. And it was cool because I was just solo in a sense, but I could really feel like I'll reiterate what Jackie said as far as the vibe and the feeling of like the way Greg was with Becky and Chris, right? He was so cool, but so like the three of you guys, so like you're almost like friends, right? Like you guys were just like so cool, right? And we just had a great time on the river for 6 days. And I don't know what night it was, but we busted out, not to go back to weed or whatever, we got high. And I was like, holy shit, I'm getting high with Greg. And I kind of just thought, you know, we got high, and I thought we were gonna hang out for a bit, and like we finished smoking basically. We were gonna go down to the fire, and then Greg was just like, I gotta go to bed. And he just dipped out to his tent and, you know, went to bed or whatever. But it's the same trip with this Groover story, and like, but I'll just remember hanging out and the way he vibed with Chris and Becky at that point in time. It was just so cool. And that was kind of middle phase, and you know, I don't know what the marriage stuff and when Tony came in and whatever. Post Greg, like, so I ended up going to law school, the only cousin in the family to follow the path laid by our cook uncles, right?
Wow.
These, these counselors, you know, these counselors that have laid the ground for us, right? Greg, Tim, and Mike, all lawyers. And I wasn't in the cards for me, really. And, you know, I ultimately decided to go to law school. I finished my first year of law school. Greg sent me a letter, unsolicited, and said, and it was on his letterhead, super professional. This is to offer you an internship at Greg Cook Law Offices. Come out for a month, pay you $2,500, room and board. I'm like, hell yeah. So I went out and lived at his house for a month. It was the house before this last house. New Berlin. I got to hang out with Tony. Angie had lived there, and PJ was just a little guy. Noah was not around yet. Billy, of course, was up in the bedroom. And it was, you know, I didn't know what to expect showing up there. And they welcomed me with open arms. I had my room to myself. And, you know, I was super nerdy in law school at that point. I was wearing khakis and button-ups, and I just tacked on to Greg. I got up in the morning, we went into the office together, we ate lunch together, we worked on cases together, and the way he interacted with his staff and his lawyer people, his opposing lawyers, I mean, it was cool. It was awesome. Like, I don't think anybody understands like how truly lawyerly Greg was. Like, he was like a legit, legendary fucking lawyer. He's a super lawyer, not just the joke magazine version of it. But he's a very experienced.
Burn on Tim.
No, Tim too. No, I'm just saying. No, Tim will back me up. Greg was he's a great lawyer.
He's a very good lawyer.
But it wasn't just that he was good. He just was like traditionally lived the life, loved it, and loved the law. He loved the cases and the clients, and, you know, going to work, stopping at Starbucks and, you know, berating the barista. That was funny every now and again because he was on some version of a oat soy milk latte thing, and then he went go around chai, whatever. We'd go get oysters when he had that office on the river. We'd go over to that oyster place, and watching that guy put down a dozen oysters, oh my God. I didn't know what to expect. Like, and then the way that he just ran that new version, what I'm calling that third version of his family, and it seems like that was maybe the budding time of that. He ran the show. It was like anybody watched Succession, he was like the Logan Roy of the family. Tony was there, Angie was there, he had the little baby, Billy was up there doing his thing, and we would get home from work and we would sit around the table, and Greg would just, he was just in his element, and everyone just like, he was just the man, right? And he was just like such a role model in like a professional sense. You know, and he would, you know, one of my regrets, he was so fun on like email. he would just love firing off emails on jokes or Seinfeld stuff or Big Lebowski stuff or law or, you know, God forbid, his politics. But like, he would just always be looking to engage and, you know, I just never really engaged, and I just kind of wish I, you know, did more. But he's so influential in my life, and, you know, the one thing that I think was just so perfect with that guy, the way he talked about Becky and Chris
Yeah.
and Forrest and Angie and recently PJ.
Football video.
He would fire off the last few falls. He would fire off a different text thread. It would contain different people every time he did it. It would be some combination of me and the uncles and the cousins, and it would be a video of PJ playing football. He was just so proud of watching PJ being a football player. And, you know, anytime Chris or Becky would come up, you know, regardless of, I don't know how you guys felt about all things throughout whenever, but he would just always be like, oh yeah, Chris is doing this, or Becky's doing this, and like, and your kids too. Don't we forget that.
Yeah.
Fucking love your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, just always talked about it. You know, and he just
Teddy, I have something to
Just-
say.
grandpa, you know. Yeah, here.
Okay. So thinking about Greg firing off emails. Do you guys remember it was a leap year. It was either 2006, the writing contest. And he started out this email thread. He got everybody on the email thread saying, February is a really hard time of the year. Everybody's really sad. Everything's so dark outside. And I thought, like, Greg gets depressed. Like, oh my, like superstars are just like us. Like, okay. And he drew everybody together. We had to read the most unhinged fucking stories about each other.
Mine's still one.
I mean, everybody thinks that theirs should be one, honestly.
Or he was maybe in third, and I was in second. But so Greg had told me the name of this girl that he liked at school. He kind of told me in confidence who he liked. Well, I was like, so I went up to her and I told her that Greg liked her, and she said, he's full of beans. So then at the dinner table at night, here's Dad and Mom, and Tim was probably sitting. Tim was the golden boy. Tim could do no wrong. Oh my gosh.
Before I knocked
And Mom would say, we gotta handle Tim with, I remember Mom said, we gotta handle Tim with kid gloves. You know, just Tim. Anyway, so we're sitting at the table and Dad's like, what happened at school? So then I'm like, well, Greg, I told Sally Wells that you really liked her. And she said you were full of beans, and Dad just exploded in laughter, just laughing. And Greg told that story. I remember when you told it, and I had totally forgotten it. You know, years later, he remembered me telling that Sally Wells said he was full of beans, and how Dad just thought it was so funny, and he was just humiliated. But yeah, Greg could tell a story like nobody
Charlie,
else.
you have to tell your story about Easter.
All right. That's good. Story. Charlie, you ready?
Yeah.
Pass the microphone to Tyler if he's around after when you're done.
Alrighty. So I didn't know Greg very well when I was very young, or I don't have many memories of him, but I remember associating him with a grizzly bear for a long time, for like 7 years, because we used to go on these fucking camping trips. And, you know, I don't know, that might be a sign of fucking privilege or whatever, but we'd go out to Colorado and we'd go on these fucking camping trips, and I remember having to tie up our garbage. We'd have to tie it up into the trees I'd be like, why the fuck are we doing that? That seems like a lot of work for nothing. And, I'd be pissed off. I'd be like, where's my iPod Touch? And, my dad would tell me, he'd say, well, we have to tie it up because grizzly bears, they smell the garbage from miles away, and they'll come and they'll snatch it from us, and they can climb trees, and they can climb really high, and they'll get it. I was like, well, okay, that sounds whatever. But fast forward to Easter, I'm in 4th grade, maybe I'm 5th grade, I'm 10 or 11 years old. And I have these 3 uncles, and I kind of differentiate them by their relative size for the most part. One of them is by far the biggest. And so we're having Easter, and my dad he prided himself on making ribs, and I'm like 50 pounds, I'm 10 years old, and I don't really like to eat all my fucking ribs, and I find the bone part of it rather disgusting, so I don't really eat. I eat around the bone. I leave plenty of meat for the metaphorical grizzly bear. And so it's Easter, and we have all this family over, and I'm probably stressed out because I want to go back up to my room or whatever, and I'm anxious. I don't know anyone too well, I feel like, and I'm this young kid, and everyone's drinking or cracking jokes or whatever, and so everyone's in the dining room, and I sneak off into the kitchen, and I hear this rustling, this deep, guttural, munching sounds of sorts, and I almost think that a wild animal has snuck into our sacred kitchen. And so I round the corner to where the garbage is. We have these big 3 garbage cans, far more garbage needed than, a house of 4 produces. But anyways, so I round the corner, and I see Greg there on his knees. And out of the garbage, he's eating my leftover ribs that I had sneakily tried to stuff into the garbage without anybody seeing, because I wanted to be a part of the clean plate club. So I see him there, and he's feasting quite literally on the remains of my ribs. And I look at him and I say, I don't even say anything. I think we might have shared a glance, a quick glance of sorts, but it was the sort of glance that he wouldn't have remembered because he was in the heat of feast. And so look away, and I'm embarrassed, and I say, who is this big man eating my leftover ribs? And I kept quiet for as long as a 10-year-old could, but my mom eventually wanders in, maybe perhaps a little wine drunk, and I tell her the only thing that's on my memory at that point, which is that I say, Mom, Uncle Greg was eating out of the garbage can. And I'm frankly worried. And so she confronts him, naturally, as you would. She says, why are you eating out of the garbage can? I think even she thought I was perhaps lying, I don't know. And but he admits to it, he fesses up, and his excuse for the whole affair was that they were above the rim. And that, in Greg's eyes, was fair game, and yeah, I have to give him credit for that. They were above the rim. I tried to stuff them as deep as I could, but it was a packed garbage bin, and so I wasn't able to get them below the rim, and he feasted on them, and no meat wasted there. So that's the story I always remember of Greg. And he was an incredibly loving guy. He was so generous, as we all know, and he was big physically, literally. He was a very big guy, but his personality and his love, and obviously his heart, as we've spoken of, was even bigger. And he was just such an amazing guy. And when I got the news of his death, obviously John and Aggie, they passed, and when they passed, that was incredibly sad. But they were both in nursing homes, and it was rather expected. But when I got a text from my mother on Monday morning, and she just told me to call her, and I just immediately knew something was wrong. And when I picked up, and she just told me that my Uncle Greg had died, it was so sad. I mean, it it was like time stopped, and I was just in total shock because, you know, I just seen him a couple weeks earlier, and he was so happy, and obviously he was asking to give me blessings, you know, and he met my girlfriend, and he just wouldn't stop talking about how much he loved her and how great it was, and, you know, that obviously he wouldn't have the opportunity to maybe introduce me to a nice Mormon woman, and so I think he was perhaps a tad sad because, you know, maybe that was in my in-way to the Mormon faith, but yeah, it was so shocking and so sad, and not to make this narcissistic and in a sort of megalomaniacal sort of way, but in sentimental, but, you know, I had like a dream like 2 days later, or maybe even that night, and I remember in this dream, you know, it was super vivid, and I like got out of a car, and I was in a cemetery, and like a white SUV pulled up, and Uncle Greg got out, and he was like bigger than ever. He was just a big guy, right? He was so big. He was short, but he was so big, and he just gave me a hug, and I don't even remember what you know, it's a dream, but whatever, you know, so it doesn't fucking mean anything maybe, but he said something to me in my ear, and I remember just being so comforted, and, you know, now that he's gone, I don't know, I just think his life is such a good model to live by, and he was such a good man. He was so generous, and I love him dearly. I'm going to miss him a lot. I'm really sad. You know, it breaks my heart that I won't be able to see him ever again, and that breaks my heart, but, you know, it makes me really happy to think of him with Grandpa John and Grandma Aggie up in heaven, and I don't know, yeah, I'll miss him greatly, and I just love him so much, so